Judith, welcome to Show Studio. You've written a brilliant book about Lee's work, and you know a huge amount about Lee McQueen as a person and the Alexander McQueen brand. Tell me a little bit about how you sort of first came across the work and why you were so inspired and moved by sort of what he was producing.
Well, I first came across Lee McQueen's work when I was living in South Africa, and I met him there. Well, I knew his work before that, but I met him there because he was part of a Smirnoff International Fashion Awards panel. That's hilarious. And anyway, so I was in the press and I was flown down to Cape Town. And Joe Casely-Hayford was there, and I've known Joe for years, and that's really how I met him. And I was very kind of nostalgic. It was 96. Anyway, so I was quite nostalgic. I was wanting to come home, and there he was, and he was so London. And he was so art college, and I thought, I really have to go home. God, I'm desperate. But anyway, just to cut a very long story short, the South African press are incredibly conventional when it comes to fashion, and especially then it was all prom frocks. It was just ghastly. And ironically, he was there with Sean Lee, which I didn't know because Sean then became a friend. But so he arrived in Cape Town, he just couldn't, it was just, South Africa then was very weird, more weird than it is now really. And you know, everybody who was working in a bar or a restaurant was black. It was very alienating. Anyway, so he, to this very white press, the award was given to a girl from Iceland who had made a dress made out of reindeer skin and put light bulbs on the inside of it. And it was great. It was really, really great. I thought, last fashion. Thank you, South Africa. And I don't mean street style, I mean fashion. And anyway, of course, Joe and the other said, you know, Lee said, well, it's got to win, so we're going to, you know, the prize was awarded. And at this press conference, all these ladies of the press started tittering and laughing that anyone would think that that was fashion. It was so weird. Anyway, so he was sitting there like we are, and he started going redder and redder and redder. And go, listen, don't you realise it's fashion? That's what fashion is. It isn't just pretty dresses, that's what fashion is. And then I went and talked to him afterwards, and I tried to get somebody to take him to the fantastic drag clubs that were in the Cape Flats, because there's fantastic drag culture in South Africa then and now. And this dressmaker at the time said, can't take him there. So poor Sean and he had spent, well, I think they had a fantastic time, but there was no fantastic kind of subcultural South Africa for him. But he was in a suit that he'd made himself. So that's how I knew him. When I came back to England, blah, 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 obviously I knew his work and was very interested. And why was I impressed by it? I was impressed by it because it was not like anything else that anybody had been doing and was doing. And there was a mad brilliance. I'm not saying it was mad, but there was a mad brilliance to it. And that brilliance was if he'd taken everything that had come before and reinterpreted it, and certainly gone against the current mood. So it was very, I think of a lot of it was very rational. His decisions were very, very rational. But the best thing I've actually ever read about him is the introduction that Jefferson Hack did from the Dazed and Confused issue that Nick did with Lee, and it's just so beautifully written. And it says, well, this is a man who made a decision not to take the money because it was before the money, and to do exactly what he wanted and to win or lose. He wasn't going to make any commercial kind of compromises. He was going to do it. And if he failed, fine, he'd failed, and he won. And I thought, that's exactly what he did do. Yeah. That was his decision. I'm going to bloody do it. And people can swivel if they like it or not.
It's interesting you say rational, because I think when people talk about his work, I think it kind of taps into what you just said, and they think of him as being, and they think of it as being very emotive and very, I think, very spontaneous, and there's a real sense of energy, and it's very raw. So it's interesting to think of him as being very rational, because I think just that contradiction with the way the work can seem quite visceral.
It's extremely visceral, but that doesn't mean it's not rational, does it? No. And I think that I think that anybody who spends 2 months learning to baste the lining of a collar at a tailor's, sitting there day in, day out. It's the story that I love most about him, actually, really. Has got to be pretty committed and either absolutely lunatic or completely sane. He wasn't a lunatic, he was sane. And I think that he had a very calculated, sensible idea to his own work. He also was very, very good at the collaboration and the support system in a way that I think John Galliano was less good. Brilliant people who worked with John, but when you look at what Lee was doing, I mean, he'd learnt from John. He'd been able to see a lot of what John Galliano had done. And he was able to assemble people who thought in the same way. But all fashion is part of part of the zeitgeist, you know. And everybody was feeling this wanting to react against the status quo of the early 90s, which was so goddamn dreary. Because it was so incredibly... It was this kind of new age wafty dresses, and a lot of it was lovely, but there was no balls to it. And that's what he did bring to it.
It's interesting you said so London when we first started talking, and I think that's how he's often written about kind of by historians and how he's remembered in the press. It is as kind of being a real emblem of that London style.
He was a London, but you see the thing is he was a Londoner, and lots of people aren't Londoners. I mean, he was born and bred London. And he understood his family history extremely well. He'd been inculcated with it by his mother. He'd been brought up to love history in the past and be fascinated by it. And I remember Brick Lane, where he used to go with his mum when he was 6 or 7, and I would go there as a teenager. We all went there to get Victorian clothes in the 70s. And 30s dresses. I mean, it was just amazing. And you could literally smell the soot, Victorian soot from the walls, you know, and you'd get clothes and the rust had gone into the, you know, when blackberries. And you could smell it, you could sense the Victorian history. It was literally, you could touch it. And he was brought up with that because he'll remember the Club Row Market that I remember that sold pets that had done since the 1850s.
Amazing.
So it's and that's all gone now. It's very, very difficult for people to understand. And it was, you're saying he's visceral. He was visceral, he was intuitive, and he was brought up with that, and it was in his blood. But what I do think is that he was very influenced by other designers. And I think he was particularly influenced by Jean-Paul Gaultier. Tell you why. I'm just looking at the work over the years, thinking, Gaultier was very good. I mean, he overtook Gaultier. Gaultier's marvellous, but he diverged from Gaultier by 95. But there's a lovely bit in that Dazed and Confused issue when he's interviewing Helen Mirren, talking about the cook, the thief, wife and lover. And he says to her, "Did you understand Gaultier?" And I just thought, what a fantastic question. People said he was thick. You know, it's Marv, do you understand Gaultier? And you think, shit, do I?
Do you think most people understand McQueen? Because I find no, not at all.
Not at all.
Why do you think that is?
Because a lot of it is about the class system. I mean, I was horrified, and I've been berating my students about it at St Martin's at the start of this week, about the way people, last week actually, wrote about him, the yob of couture, which I find so offensive. By the way, it's Cockney rhyming slang. It's boy backwards. You know, how dare they? And a horrible picture of him looking all kind of chubby and with a kind of chavvy shirt. You know, the boy done good. I mean, they do the same for John Galliano. And I think that he probably fitted into that, but most people are not, who write about fashion, are not part of fashion. Part of fashion are the people who are involved in studios, in making, in buying, in wearing. A lot of the people who are journalists, God knows I was one, are not involved in it, and they're outsiders, and they're going to make judgments which go in writing that appeal to their readers as much as anybody else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does, that does. It's interesting though, isn't it? Because I feel like he is adored by kind of fashion students, but and he's adored by the industry today, but I also wonder if he's adored for perceptions and ideas that perhaps don't relate to a lot of the work he was doing. And I feel like a lot of his history has been rewritten.
You know what? All you have to do with McQueen is look at the clothes and the shows. That's all you have to do. You don't need God, you know, I should be shot for this. You actually don't need to read anything. You just need to look.
Doing a really good job of plugging your book.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, I know. It's typical. Stupid cow. But you just need to look and to experience. You need to listen to the music of it and get that energy and just see what he did with shapes. He has been misunderstood. He was his own worst enemy. He disliked the press, most apart from Susanna Frankel and a few others, quite rightly. And right until the end, they were writing unpleasant things about him. And the early articles on him, when I was still living in South Africa, about misogyny, etc., were really hostile to him. I mean, he had a tough time, and he wasn't going to compromise. He didn't compromise with the ghastly South African press then in '93, the bourgeois press. He didn't. Why should he? And the other reason that I wanted to do it was because Bobby Hilson is a friend of mine, and she was the one who got him into St Martin's, and he was so fond of her. And she was the person who really gave him the break prior to Isabella and Katie and, you know, everybody working with him. And she was a supporter and she wanted me to do it. And that really is it, because I think he's very much, even though he was only at St Martin's for 18 months, there's a lot of him that is part of it, you know, in the culture of St Martin's, good and bad.
Well, you work with St Martin's, obviously, and you work with a lot of young people. And I wonder, I've been thinking a lot about it because of the tuition fees and also I think because of the way people have responded to Christopher Shannon and sort of how the fact that he won that GQ Fashion Fund, and there's been a lot of comments of, you know, will we have another Lee McQueen, another Christopher Shannon, someone who doesn't come from a wealthy background, someone whose parents can't sort of bankroll them for a few seasons. And it really worried me. And I thought, you know, do you think are the circumstances the same where you could have someone who could come into fashion like that? You don't think so?
I tell you why, because Bobby and Jane Rapley let him in. Without the qualifications. They took him in on talent. If you ask Bobby Hilson, said the one thing that matters is talent. That's it. You can teach students to be professional, but talent you can't.
Yeah.
And so he was taken in. The rules, I won't say were broken, but they were bended in a way that in traditional art colleges they used to be on talent. And I think it's not the fees, it's the debt.
Yeah.
You can get the loan, but can you pay it back? But it's very interesting about it. You know, art colleges have always been full of smart background young girls who couldn't get into university. God knows my mother was one. Do you know what I mean? You know, and they're paying the fee. It was ever thus, you know, and at St Martin's and the other art colleges, and the others would have lucky enough to have a grant. The real problem is that there isn't a grant system. Yeah. Because if there was a grant, you can always take people, because they're not going to leave with the debt. Yeah. What do I think that he'd get in now? Probably not. No, why would he? Why would he, if he knew that it was going to be, I don't know how many thousands it is, but it's a great deal more than the 4,000 that he paid then. Why would he be? He'd be insane. There isn't the structure there to absorb all these students. And the thing, God, they're going to shoot me at St Martin's. Sorry, guys. Sorry. But what he did, and Christopher Shannon, whose work I love, is what they've done is, and the big difference is you take the risk and you start on your own. And he didn't have any money behind him. He was lucky enough to have Auntie Reenie to pay, but he didn't have any, so he went out and did it anyway. And what we say to students is, you don't need money, just go and do something. You don't need money. And I remember late Louise Wilson saying to Susie Rushton, she was asking about a BFC award, and she said, well, money doesn't make them talented, does it? And it doesn't, you know, so it's, what we need is an industry big enough to absorb these students so that they can then go into ateliers and be apprentices. And remember, he was an apprentice.
But there's not that same focus, is there, on sort of spending a lot of time learning? I think students now, they have different expectations. Perhaps that idea.
Why?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird one.
God, it annoys me. Don't they think it's going to be easy?
Yeah, I think so. But I think it's because education's changed, hasn't it? And people feel like they're buying an education now rather than having an education. So they feel this sense of entitlement.
Well, I'm sure that when Erasmus was being paid to teach people, the kids thought, or dare I say Aristotle, thought that he was their servant. He wasn't, was he?
Yeah.
I don't think Louise would have, or Bobby, or anybody thinks that. I certainly don't.
Let's talk about how he's perceived with the... No, it's fine. Let's talk about how he's perceived by the fashion historian, because I think that's really interesting as well, and how he will go down in history. But also just already, like, there are certain collections that are seen as really, really iconic, and I think that's contributed to how we perceive his work and how we perceive his signatures. So things like Voss.
Voss is important. Voss was and is very important because that was fabulous, because it poked fun at the fashion press by making them look at themselves marvellous and having a fat woman on the inside. The one, as he said, the one thing that no one fashion is fat, marvellous. The influence of Joel Peter Witkin, fantastic. The idea of doing really an installation and challenging the audience to what a fashion show should be, to be talking about the madness of fashion, like being in an asylum, and you look at Voss. I mean, there are some incredible pieces, like of course it's a flayed flesh dress, the one that Erin O'Connor wore with the slide film with red and the fabulous ostrich. I mean, that's about blood. That's about a flowed skin. And the fantastic medieval headpieces, going down those. But in that collection was a whole load of really commercial stuff. If you really count those, as I did, there's a lot of exits. So you have the mix, you have the clever mix of presenting showpieces, which Galliano did less and less and less and less at Dior. It was showpiece. But you have the extraordinary pieces that, what do? I mean, they take you outside fashion, don't they? They take you into another world. He wanted fashion, his shows, to be theatre, to be an experience. But they always were. I mean, what it fascinates me is that I think he was the tail end of that. I don't think he was the beginning.
No.
I think he was the end of it. And I think that now, when you look at fashion shows now, I mean, obviously Chanel is different, and and a fantastic experience. We're not talking about Paris. We're talking about London. Up, down, up, down, up, down. They might as well be in bloody Harrods in 1953. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's no whooping, there's no celebration, there's no applaud, But you're asking about fashion history. What do you think the effect of that Voss will have?
I just think it's interesting, these shows that are picked up on, it tends to be more about the show than about the clothes, and I wonder how that's changed our perception of kind of his signatures as a designer. That's what I find quite interesting.
Yeah, I think that he really wanted that to affect the way we saw his work. I think it's definitely part and parcel. The flapping out in Voss of that apparently he saw, and I have not been able to find it, at a performance in some Shakespeare, and I can't remember, I was told Shakespeare at the Whitehall Theatre or something with Vanessa Redgrave, where they did the same. Always it would come from something. I mean, he was extraordinarily creative, but he was very clever at picking up at things going around and developing that. So there's literally that element of theatre. I think that he wanted it to be performance, and if you look at something like Deliverance, or I mean, the Deliverance show was so extraordinary, the Michael Clark, with the dancing and their kind of way of presenting those clothes. But also, I mean, the kind of fantastic mix of menswear and women's wear, which you're seeing a bit more, but men and women on the runway, and hugely sexualizedly gorgeous blokes, and and these fake, Karen Elson looking all dreamy and all of this. But the raw physicality of that, and the idea of tiredness. So there's always, I think, McQueen, he's telling a story. I think that's important. Do stop me, because the other one is it's only Games Divine, but The Man Who Knew Too Much. I think that's a really interesting show, because I think that the title, and researching the book, and I'm not going to say anything that's going to get any of us sued, but when I was researching the book, I heard a lot about that. and it's a real statement.
Do you think that will be his lasting legacy, this idea that you can sort of do what you want, you can be incredibly punchy? Is that what you'd like to see as the historian, him to be remembered for, not kind of, you know, this focus on tailoring, not...
No, I want both.
Both.
And can we get over the tailoring? Sorry, that wasn't personal. Because I always go on about it because it's heaven, it's divine. Yeah. But no, forget the tailoring. It's the research, his references that were so good. You know what somebody said to me? I'm sure I've heard this before. Oh, he knew nothing before Izzy. Nothing. He was so ignorant. This poor little kid from the street. Hello. Yeah. I don't think so. Going to, you know, galleries when he was 14 and 15 on his own. You know, this is somebody who was absorbing. Same as Charles Frederick Worth did it. What does he do in his lunch hour? Goes to the National Gallery. So that, you know, that love of the 15th century. I mean, that's what fascinates me, is about how he uses history in his work as references, and then will develop. It's that level of research and references that is so masterly that Gautier has. They diverge, they have a different attitude, but that's important. And the showmanship, yeah, but then Gautier was a great showman, is a great showman.
So what's the magic? Because it seems you're associating his skills with lots of different people's skills. What is it about McQueen that made him
different from everybody else? Absolutely his own man in his work. Forget about the personal stuff. Absolutely. It's, you know, always know when something's a McQueen, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
And that's, he's got a signature. As Luz would say, you've got to have a signature. He's got it.
Thanks, Judith.
Okay, thank you.